the two big. We'll do the big one that everyone is talking about. It's the week of USAID, the week of DOGE, the Friday night order from this judge, forget his name now. So I couldn't get my hands on the proceedings, from beginning to end. But the bottom line is, I mean, it was a question of access to payment systems, where people are asking who's in charge, who controls the purse strings, who gets to make these decisions, and how the hell does a state court get involved in dictating what is effectively executive federal policy? Can you flesh it out in terms that people are going to understand, like myself?
So what we've been predicting here is that when Trump tries to defang the deep state and tries to take away the excessive powers of the administrative bureaucratic state, that he would run into not only incredible hostility from the DC crowd, the think tanks, the policymakers, a lot of the politicians on the Democratic side, etc., but that he would also run into judicial hostility, because this is the professional managerial class using licensure and credentialing, which is another way to say using the state, to enrich and empower themselves at the expense of the American people. And they did this originally under civil service reform, saying they were taking apart the corruption of the political machines of the late 19th century, the so-called spoil system of American politics, where he who wins gets the spoils. That what used to be the case is whoever was elected to run the executive branch got to hire who was working for the executive branch. In the name of stopping corruption, they decided that somehow it would be less corrupt to have an unelected bureaucracy permanently in positions of power, regardless of what the American people want. I've never understood how that's less corrupt. But that's what you're taught in school by your little political science teacher and history professor, because they are aligned with the same prejudices of political control and economic control toward the professional managerial class as possible. The professional managerial class's biggest allies are the judiciary, because like them, they're unelected. Like them, they don't face future elections. Like them, they come from the same professional managerial class. Like them, they share many of the prejudices of that professional managerial class towards licensures, towards credentialing, all of those things. So what I predicted way back in 2017 at the Pluriball in D.C., talking to the Trump folks, was that Trump was going to face an all-out war from the administrative bureaucratic state, and then the judiciary would come to its aid more often than not. And that's exactly what happened in Trump's first term. So the second term, he realizes the degree of entrenched hostility in this administrative bureaucratic state. These are people that are part of the executive branch of government, but that have become immune from political pressure. In fact, they're the ones who impose the political pressure, using their control of the think tanks, using their control over the federal bureaucracy, using their control over the media. And what USAID DOGE work is disclosing is that, in fact, they have been literally bribing people with this level of control, of coercive control. It was known it was being done internationally. Anybody with their eyes open and any foreign leader knew exactly what USAID and NED were, that it wasn't there to help the poor people, that it wasn't there to educate the national, it wasn't there to promote democracy. Only an idiot would believe that. What it's there for is to entrench the deep state. When the CIA's budget got hamstrung in the 1970s, thanks to the House Committee on Assassinations and the Church Committee on Intelligence, Special Select Committee on Intelligence, they've been prohibited from spending the money directly for a lot of those projects that they like to do of propagandizing, getting pandemics out and about, destabilizing governments, running the world, basically, enabling. I had a friend of mine that got one of these grants to help women in the third world. And guess what the grant became? How to get them to buy Coca-Cola. That's how it translated at USAID. USAID has always been a crock. It doesn't aid anybody. This is my longtime argument against foreign aid, which is different than some others. It's that foreign aid ain't actually aid to foreigners. It's aid to the deep state to entrench its control around the world for its global corporate pals and defense industry pals. power-hungry freaks. And somewhere along the way, Trump figured that out and got Musk to go in with DOGE to dig it out and to prove it. And they found it in mass. Legally, President Trump can absolutely shut down USAID. USAID was not started by Congress, not created by Congress. It was created by executive order. So the president can reassign or just completely destroy or create a new agency as much as he wants. So all of that is purely legal. But what's happening is people are finding the loosest and thinnest pretext to run to their pals in the judicial branch, say, stop Trump from doing what the American people want him to do. This is an old history of the judicial branch, of coming to the aid of oligarchic institutions against the interest of the American people. This is what the Supreme Court did in the 1850s in creating a civil war. The people in the North did not want. They wanted ex-slaves to be recognized as citizens. The Supreme Court said, "No, we're not going to let you do that," and that gave us the Civil War. So that's pretty similar. You have similar histories with the Supreme Court throughout its history, where it's defending the last vestiges of oligarchic institutions against the American people's will. What this New York judge did is he granted an emergency TRO, temporary restraining order, that prohibits the President of the United States from exercising his constitutional discretionary duties, that prohibits the Secretary of the Treasury from monitoring where his own money is going out of the Secretary of Treasury. That is how insane this judge's action is.
One thing, it's a question that I ask, and I don't know the answer because you read the conflicting sides. The argument or the rebuttal to it being created by executive order is it wasn't. It was created in virtue of the Foreign Assistance Act, which then led to the creation of USAID. And so the argument is that
just makes the USAID, what the Foreign Assistance Act did was not create USAID. It said, here's some money to the federal government to spend on foreign sources. And then John Kennedy created USAID with the purpose of actually doing that purpose. By the 1970s, it had completely shifted, and by the early 80s, fully shifted, because the CIA, USAID's budget is bigger than the CIA's. To give people an idea how big this budget is, most Americans have no idea that USAID even existed. And that's where legally the agency, the congressional constraint is where the money goes. And that's it. And in many of these cases, that congressional constraint was broad. It was limited in terms of how much it actually constrained. And I would note that one of the reasons why USAID got themselves in this position where they can't run to Congress for protection is because of how many Republicans they've antagonized over the years. When you antagonize people like Marco Rubio, who's your otherwise erstwhile ally in the deep state, you've really done great damage to your cause. But what they decided, they made two mistakes that ended up backfiring on them. One, people at USAID decided to align the deep state with creating boondoggles and special pet projects for the Democratic Party. So if you're a Democrat and you were politically connected, USAID got you money, one way, shape, or form. Didn't matter whether you were in the media, whether you're in the think tank industry, whether you're in academia, whether you just have a blog. The deep state became the Democratic Party patronage delivery machine. That was going to antagonize Republicans over time. They had previously been equally entrenched with the Bushite wing of the Republican Party, but not your normie wing of the Republican Party, because that part of the party's never been interested in giving away all our money to foreign governments or to the deep state or the administrative state. So that's part of the political problem they ran into. The second one was, you look at Joni Ernst from Iowa. She would love to be a deep state ally. The problem is the deep state has shut her out because the Democratic Party demanded it. So when you shut out the Ernsts and the Rubios of the world, you get no political cover from any Republicans. And that's what they're running into. The USA thought they would have congressional cover. They don't. So they can say, we think Congress has to do this. Well, Congress isn't saying that. Congress isn't choosing to take any legislative action. So Congress doesn't agree. What the problem is, they have no political support from the broad majority of the country. That's why, where are they going? They're going to Democratic state attorney generals to get them to file suit, going to the unions and going to the think tanks and NGOs that they're aligned with and getting them to file suit. The problem is, if the courts are going to maintain this standing construct that you have to have a certain kind of constitutional injury to sue, that they've used to gut all kinds of cases, including cases against vaccine mandates, there's no way any of these people have standing to sue. Historically, no taxpayer has standing to sue about where their money is spent. How do these people have standing to sue if that's going to be the doctrine? Again, I'm a critic of standing, don't believe in it. But if it's going to exist, at least has to be applied consistently.
Or it'll open up the window for people who now feel aggrieved that their taxpayer dollars were going to be squandered unbeknownst to them. But the question is this: the State Department budget is 50 some odd billion. USAID was 50 some odd billion. So that 1%, only 1% of the federal budget. How the hell does it not go audited? Like, how does it go unexposed or undisclosed to the American people for decades?
Fundamentally, it was a deep state operation, and so deep state intimidation prevented its meaningful inspection and review, though it was building up hostility in that process. It was cutting off allies on a partisan basis, because the second step they chose, which they chose really under the Obama administration, was to become the personal patronage machine of the Democratic Party that the Clinton Global Foundation had partially played before then during the Bush years, but USAID just took it to a different scale. And it should come as no surprise that the usual suspects and their organizations show up as major recipients of USAID. This includes George Soros-tied NGOs that have enabled illegal immigration to occur. This includes, Soros had some of his radio stations broadcasting out in California when ICE is coming to help people avoid and evade ICE raids. And the people he's helping avoid ICE raids, again, ICE right now is focused exclusively on dangerous criminals who are illegal aliens in the country. That's who he's protecting right now. Also not a big surprise. Guess who ends up being one of the biggest recipients of USAID? The guy who clearly doesn't need it, Bill Gates. So, so what you see is a monetary, some of us have been saying for a long time, follow the money and then stop the money. Follow the money will expose how the deep state operates on a functional basis. Stop the money will deep six the deep state's power, and it's the perniciousness of that power. The principal beneficiary of USAID being replaced within the State Department is the American people, because now it is subject to democratic controls, subject to regular supervision and restrictions, subject to the intentions of what Congress intended that money to go for. In addition, the second beneficiary is every foreign government around the world, because USAID is the leader of destabilization around the world. It is the number. Look at where their money goes, and you'll find overthrown country, overthrown country, overthrown country, overthrown country, overthrown country, well, civil war, civil war, civil war.
I don't know if you saw the interview I did earlier today with Jordan Goudreau, who was partook in the attempted Maduro coup, and USAID was in there somewhere. At least I know that it came up in the discussion. But hold on, just in case anybody didn't hear this clip here, let me bring this up. This is Bill Gates. Let's get to. Well, I'm very nervous that it's going to cut
private sector work.
Here, hold on.
Ow. Well, Elon, his private sector work, has been very innovative, really fantastic. A lot of private sector people, when they get into government, they don't take the time necessarily to see what the good work is or why it's structured the way it is. So I'm a little worried, particularly with this USAID stuff. Mm-hmm. My foundation partners with USAID on nutrition and
vaccines,
getting vaccines out. And
we can stop it there. They partner with them.
Nutrition, the leading maker of fake meat is supporting nutrition. It's nutrition that's going to sterilize you. It's nutrition that's going to, again, Bill Gates, by his own admission, has said all of his objectives concerning Gavi, concerning various vaccine institutes, the Gates Foundations, that his big obsession is limiting population. That's him. He wants massive numbers of millions of people dead or not to come into life. This is his own admission. He has said this repeatedly. He wants the population down from where it is. The only way you get it down from where it is a bunch of people don't come into life that otherwise would have, and some people die off in mass that are currently alive. That's who Bill Gates is. He's a eugenicist. He should be in prison. He should be world enemy number one. He's actually beneath George Soros in that regard.
Just to highlight the absurdity, this is Bill Gates talking about taking government monies, lots of it, and this is the same party saying nobody elected Elon Musk, which is even less accurate because everyone knew what coalition they were electing. But the question is this: because in a lot of these decisions, they're making a distinction between government appointees, special appointees, and I don't necessarily. I think I understand the distinction that some people are appointed, but not through a confirmation process. So, what are they? Special appointees or?
Well, that's part of the problem. So for a long time, there's been a debate since Nixon really kind of started it, though Roosevelt got it going, which is how powerful should the executive branch be? And it's a theory called the unitary executive that was propounded originally by Democrats and then by Republican legal scholars. But some, I would say, constitutionalists and populists came to the same conclusion they did about the necessity of a unitary executive. And what that means, that's what this is all coming to a head. These judges are making a mistake. They're going if they would just curtail their rulings to cases of people that have a real legitimate claim, a clearly legitimate claim, only concern them, don't do broad injunctions as to other people, don't try to intrude or invade the executive branch, just try to protect clearly demarcated areas of either congressional authority or constitutional authority against the executive branch. They're not doing that. They're so eager to protect their pals that they're signing. That judge would have, in New York, if Letitia James would have blown a leaf across his desk, he would have signed it. To paraphrase the famous quote about the O.K. Allen, the governor of Louisiana, when Earl and Huey were at each other's throats, the Long brothers back in the day. He said O.K. Allen, was the kind of governor that Huey could blow a leaf across his desk and he'd sign it. I found it to be equally true of many judges. They handpicked that judge. You might wonder, how do they manipulate the judge? Well, first they went to the Southern District of New York, even though a lot of the attorneys generals have no ties to New York that were bringing the case, number one. Number two, they brought it on a Friday afternoon where they knew who the emergency call duty judge was. So they knew who the judge was that they could handpick their judge, which is what they did. They abused the process to handpick a judge. It's a problem in the system that the system needs to fix. That you can't have solely one judge appointed on emergency call basis and people know who that judge is. Or what will happen is that will circumvent the entire random assignment of judges, which, by the way, is not only a mandate by local judicial rule and by congressional statute, but it's a constitutional requirement to have random assignment of judges where it's available. Now, you have a lot of single judge divisions across the country, which have their own nasty history when you dig in, but that's another story for another day. But that's how they get this judge to sign it. But he's so broad, so expansive. When you, like some of the other judges, they had the union suing, think tank suing, NGO suing, different judges issuing different rulings, conflicting, by the way. But, what does this party have the right to sue? One time, yes, one time, no. Does the party have a right to claim? Is there a right to do nationwide injunctions? This is an ongoing debate. Gorsuch and Thomas don't like all these nationwide injunctions. They want to restrict the power to the plaintiffs before them or the jurisdiction they're in. Is that become part of the process? But this judge just didn't impose any limits on his order. So the other ones that had either dismissed the cases because they said you don't have standing, or dismissed the cases because they said there's no congressional or constitutional authority that's being invaded here, that this is pure executive branch discretion in the meaning of a constitutional democracy, reflecting the elected interest of the people and the elected head of the executive branch. But what the issue has been, they've tried to immunize and sort of keep barriers up so that the elected branches of government can have no power over the deep state and the administrative state. And they've done this. Sometimes they get Congress to pass laws, civil service, pension benefits, etc. Another way they do it is through contracts with vendors, contracts with third-party independent participants, labor union contracts, and use that to restrict the elected head of the executive branch, which I've always found problematic. Private sector unions, I'm a big believer in. Public sector unions, I don't think should exist. That's countered the entire nature. You then have a private cartel of individuals who can dictate to the elected people what happens and doesn't happen with their money. I mean, it makes no sense. But what this is all heading to is this is going to accelerate these controversies and disputes to the Supreme Court. And the factual predicate of the cases before them is going to be so favorable to Trump's side that I now think the overreach by lower court judges is going to backfire in the Supreme Court stepping in and likely doing something that Roberts and others have talked about for decades, which is empowering a unitary executive branch, which is to say you can never say that the president can't fire somebody that's within the executive branch. You can never say that a lower ranked employee can override the policy preferences of the elected head of the executive branch. This would get rid of all of the special immunities and protections that the bureaucratic branch and the deep state have created. And I was doubtful that Roberts and the Supreme Court would deliver on this unitary executive and would equally defer to deep state prerogatives and bureaucratic power. But this goes so far. When you get Senator Mike Lee saying, let's look at the impeachment of judges. Elon Musk talking about, let's look at the impeachment of judges. Something I've been talking about on here for years, said that the judicial branch has been going way too big for its britches, needs to get hemmed in, and the more extreme examples of judges going completely off the res, they need to face discipline like Justice Samuel Chase did when he was trying to weaponize the judicial branch at the very beginning of our country. And that curtailed that, because the judicial branch has a long, nasty history that when it doesn't respect the will of the elected people and doesn't respect the language, the words of our Constitution, it precipitates Civil War type conditions in the United States. That's how bad it can get, because they are so clueless, so out of touch, so aligned with their professional class compadres that they don't understand. They're like the DC judges in the January 6 cases. They're shocked at the public backlash. They can't understand it because they live in this tiny little bubble that is nowhere connected to the real world. And that's what you're seeing with these judges willy-nilly signing orders that are insane. No, President of the United States, you can't look at your own intelligence. No, President of the United States, you can't look at where money is being spent. No, President of the United States, you can't say where people are staffed or not. In other words, no, President of the United States, you can't exercise any of the powers that the people just gave you. That's how nuts these judges are. So the Supreme Court's got to come in and clear it up for good. That there can be no constitutional constraint on the elected head of the executive branch deciding the policy and personnel of the executive branch.
You say that, and then, we have the Supreme Court come in and issue rulings that ultimately don't get respected and get outright defied by the lower courts. You got the Bruin decision, which the states are overtly disrespecting or disregarding or revolting against entirely. You got the the self-executing disqualification ruling, which they haven't enforced on Couey Griffin, despite the fact that he was removed from office for a self-declared self-executing insurrection. And so it's great the SCOTUS does it when they do it and then don't enforce it when the lower courts defy it openly.
Yeah, well, I think that's what they're going to be forced to act, because these orders are so ridiculous. And the states are so arrogant that they get a judge in their pocket to issue an insane order over a weekend without even affording Trump's team the opportunity to know of the suit's existence before issuing the order, least of all be able to brief it or argue it. And then they immediately run in and demand contempt sanctions against the government for not obeying their most egregious interpretation of the order. So they're forcing the issue early, and because they're so used to the judges being in their pocket, they're assuming the Supreme Court won't intervene. The Supreme Court probably is going to intervene now because it doesn't have a choice. And this is remember what we predicted about the January 6 cases and the other Trump cases. We said they're pushing it so far, the Supreme Court will have no choice but to issue rulings it doesn't want. It doesn't want to help Trump, if you understand who Barrett is, and if you understand who Roberts is. You'd understand that the majority of the Supreme Court isn't eager to embrace Trump or empower Trump. But they're going to have no choice but to do so due to the public backlash against the judicial branch for these insane intrusions into executive branch prerogative. I was resharing an article that I put up back in 2017 when I was working or writing occasionally with Breitbart. I'd write legal review articles for them and the rest. It was my way to try to reach the Trump world, was through Breitbart's pages, particularly Bannon, but also others. And what I proposed back then was that Trump is going to have to consider at key points going full Andrew Jackson. And what does that mean? Andrew Jackson famously said the Supreme Court has issued its ruling. Now it can go enforce it. And Jackson's point was the Supreme Court is not going to force a second bank on the United States. I just got elected to say, no, we're not going to centralize financial power in that way. And you can say whatever you want. I'm going to shut it down anyway. And that's what happened. And it shocked the court because they realized the limits of their power when a president called them on that limits of their power. I would note Dershowitz agreed with me back in 2017 and 2018. He said some of these nationwide injunctions that clearly exceed the equitable power of the court, the president should just ignore, which, by the way, the IRS does regularly. The IRS ignores any ruling that it doesn't like unless that ruling is controlling over where that particular IRS office is located. So you could have every federal appellate court in the country say something and they ignore it. So this is what the administrative state does when they're on the receiving end of this. So I think, unfortunately, Trump is going to have to consider it. That's what J.D. Vance is pointing out. He's like, look, the judicial branch cannot dictate to the executive branch what it has been elected to do within its constitutional scope of power. And any attempt to do so probably has to be ignored and be enforced anyway. I think that we'd be heading to that kind of quote unquote constitutional crisis, unquote, but it would be a crisis created by the courts themselves. And that's why I think the Supreme Court will use these cases to broadly expand put it this way, it's probably not a coincidence that key members of DOGE's team are Supreme Court clerks. They either have been or are going to be clerks for Supreme Court justices. In other words, they know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly what grounds they want that legal dispute to be determined. And cases like telling the president he can't dictate his own policy, he can't dictate his own personnel, he can't hire intelligence, and he can't even look at where the money is going, is about as compelling a case for the courts of law as well as the court of public opinion as you can get. And the deep state defenders and the democratic bureaucracy lovers have stepped into a trap, and they knew the arrogance of Letitia James would facilitate it. They've gotten the craziest ruling from the craziest court that it shows how dangerous the issue is, that perfectly sets it up for the Supreme Court of the United States to finally restore constitutional power to the executive branch, which may be Trump's lasting legacy. If we're going to defeat the deep state and going to limit the corrosive power of the federal administrative state, we've got to restore the unitary executive that's what the Article 2 says. It says executive power is fully vested in the President of the United States. Period. End of story. It's time to, like most things, look to the Constitution for the remedy to our current problem. It provides one. We just need the Supreme Court to follow it. And Democrats and deep state defenders have actually facilitated that by showing how insane the courts will be and how overreaching they will this early on.